Hey, I'm the Asian guy. I've been around financial markets long enough to know one rule never changes. If the TV is loud, it's usually because somebody doesn't want you to hear the quiet sound of money moving. I don't just watch press conferences, I watch balance sheets, shipping routes, and the kind of boring charts that make grown men in suits suddenly pick up the phone at 3 a.m. So if you turn on the television today, you will see the same looping footage. You will see helicopters. You will see special forces. You will see the dramatic extraction of a Latin American leader. The media is calling it a victory for democracy. They are calling it a restoration of order. They are analyzing the tactical brilliance of the raid and the political fallout in Washington. But as always, they are showing you the circus, so you do not look at the bank vault. What happened in Venezuela today was not a political operation. It was not about human rights. It was not even really about Nicolas Maduro. It was a margin call. And if that sounds crazy, that's because most people were trained to think geopolitics is about speeches and flags. No. When the stakes get real, geopolitics becomes risk management with guns. To understand why the United States just took the extreme risk of launching a military operation in South America, you do not need to look at the polls or the Constitution. You need to look at a much more boring, much more terrifying chart. The United States Strategic Petroleum Reserve. For the last 3 years, the United States has been draining its emergency oil tanks to artificially lower the price of gas. They have been selling the family silver to pay the rent. The reserve is now at its lowest level since the 1980s. And don't let anyone dress it up. When you dump an emergency stockpile to calm voters and calm inflation, you're basically pawning the fire extinguisher to buy candles. At the same time, the petrodollar, the system that forces the world to buy oil in U.S. currency, is on life support. Saudi Arabia has refused to renew its exclusive agreement. The BRICS nations are trading energy in yuan and local currencies. The exorbitant privilege of the dollar is evaporating. You can feel it in the little headlines people scroll past. Rupees here, yuan there, a pilot program that somehow becomes the new normal. And then last week, rumors began to circulate in the financial capitals. Rumors that Venezuela, the country with the largest proven oil reserves on the planet, was about to sign a definitive agreement to price its oil exclusively in a basket of BRICS currencies. That was the red line. The United States cannot afford to let the largest oil tank in the world disconnect from the dollar. If that happens, the demand for U.S. Treasury bonds collapses. Interest rates skyrocket. The entire debt-based economy of the West implodes. This is the part they won't say out loud on cable news. A lot of national security is really just bond market security. So Washington had a choice. They could accept the new multipolar reality and negotiate, or they could use the one asset they still have in abundance: military force. They chose the gun. What we are witnessing is not liberation. It is liquidation. The United States has effectively foreclosed on a country to secure its assets. They have seized the collateral. This is the return of 19th century gunboat diplomacy disguised as 21st century humanitarianism. In this video, we are going to ignore the noise. We are not going to talk about the raid. We are going to talk about the reason. We are going to expose the desperate economic mathematics that drove the United States to invade the sovereign nation. We will show you how the death of the petrodollar has turned the U.S. military into a global debt collector, and we will explain why this tactical victory in Caracas might actually be the strategic defeat that breaks the dollar's back forever. Welcome to the real war. It's not about ballots. It's about barrels. To understand the ferocity of this move, you have to look at the American balance sheet. For decades, the Western media has sold us a myth. They told us the shale revolution had made the United States energy independent. They told us the U.S. was the world's largest oil producer, and therefore it no longer needed to care about the Middle East or Latin America. This was a half-truth, and in geopolitics, a half-truth is a full lie. The United States does produce a massive amount of oil, but it produces light, sweet crude. It is like champagne, bubbly, light, and expensive. The problem is that the American industrial machine, the massive refineries in Texas and Louisiana, was built 50 years ago. It was designed to process heavy, sour crude. It was built to run on the thick sludge-like oil that comes from the Middle East and Venezuela. This is the refinery mismatch that the mainstream economists ignore. The U.S. produces champagne, but its engines run on diesel. For decades, they solved this by importing heavy oil from Saudi Arabia. But that relationship is dead. We have discussed this in previous videos. Saudi Arabia is no longer the gas station of the West. Riyadh is cutting production to keep prices high. They are joining the BRICS. They are ignoring calls from the White House. So the United States faced a math problem. They were running out of the specific type of oil they need to keep their economy functioning. And worse, they had already played their ace card. Over the last 2 years, in a desperate attempt to stop inflation from destroying the sitting president's approval ratings, the administration drained the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, SPR. The SPR is meant for war. It is meant for national emergencies. It is not meant to buy votes. Yet they opened the taps. They flooded the market with millions of barrels to keep gas prices artificially low. Now the bill has come due. The SPR is hollowed out. The emergency tank is empty. And just as the tank hit empty, the Middle East flared up, threatening to cut off supply entirely. Washington looked at the map. They looked for heavy crude. Canada? They're already pumping at max capacity. Russia? Sanctioned and hostile. Saudi Arabia? Uncooperative and pivoting east. So that left only one option. The largest proven reserves on the planet. The massive heavy crude fields of the Orinoco Belt, Venezuela. For years, the U.S. tried to starve Venezuela into submission with sanctions. They tried to create a parallel government. They tried soft coups. None of it worked. The oil stayed in the ground. Or worse, it started leaking out to China via dark fleet tankers. The economic pressure in Washington became unbearable. If oil prices spiked to $150 a barrel because of a Middle East conflict, the U.S. economy, already teetering on recession, would collapse. The dollar would lose its purchasing power overnight. They could not afford to buy Venezuela's oil at market prices, and they certainly couldn't afford to let China buy it. So the calculation changed. Containment was no longer an option. Possession became the necessity. This is why the narrative changed so fast. Just a few months ago, there were talks of easing sanctions. There were diplomats shaking hands. But when the SPR hit critical lows, the handshake turned into a fist. The U.S. military operation was not launched to save the Venezuelan people. It was launched to secure the Orinoco Belt. Yes, Orinoco, call it what you want. The point is the same. The heavy crude lifeline. It was a hostile takeover of a distressed asset. Think about the timing. This operation happened just as global oil prices were threatening to break out. It happened just as the U.S. realized they could not refill the reserves on the open market without bankrupting the Treasury. They needed a new supplier who wouldn't ask for market rates. They needed a supplier they could control. They needed a vassal. And since the Saudi prince refused to be a vassal, they decided to create a new one in Caracas. It is a brutal, cynical application of power. The U.S. military is effectively acting as the private security force for the U.S. Department of Energy. But here is the catch. While this might solve the physical shortage of oil for a few months, It accelerates the financial disaster because the rest of the world is watching. Every country in the global south, from Nigeria to Brazil to Indonesia, is looking at Venezuela and thinking, if we refuse to sell our resources in dollars, will they come for us next? This fear does not create loyalty. It creates an exodus. If the empty oil tanks were the gun, the currency war was the bullet. We must remember the fundamental law of the post-1971 world. The US dollar is not backed by gold. It is not backed by industrial productivity. It is backed by a simple agreement made 50 years ago with the House of Saud. Oil must be sold in dollars. This is the magic trick, because every nation on earth needs oil, and every nation on earth needs dollars to buy it. This creates a permanent artificial demand for the US currency. It allows the United States to print trillions of dollars out of thin air, export the inflation to the rest of the world, and never face the consequences. This system is the exorbitant privilege. It is the source of American prosperity. But recently, the magic started to fade. We have watched the BRICS nations systematically dismantle this system. We saw Russia demanding rubles for gas. We saw the UAE settling oil trades in Indian rupees. We saw Saudi Arabia discussing the Petro-yuan with Beijing. And let me say it the way people whisper it on trading floors. Once the exceptions start, the whole rule starts dying. But Venezuela was the final straw. Intelligence reports, which the mainstream media is conveniently ignoring, suggested that Caracas was preparing a nuclear option for the financial markets. Venezuela was on the verge of officially integrating its energy sector into the Chinese Cross-Border Interbank Payment System, CIP. They were preparing to price their entire reserve, the largest on Earth, not in dollars, but in a basket of currencies led by the yuan and backed by gold. If this had happened, it would have been a signal to the entire global South. It would have proven that you can possess massive wealth outside the American banking system and survive. Washington saw this as an existential threat. If Venezuela's oil is traded in yuan, then China does not need to hold US dollars to buy it. If China dumps its US dollars, the value of the American currency crashes. If the dollar crashes, the cost of living in the United States doubles or triples overnight. The raid on Caracas was a desperate attempt to plug this leak in the financial dam. By physically seizing the government, the U.S. installs a new administration. And what will be the first act of this new administration? You can bet your life savings on it. They will declare that for the stability of the markets, Venezuela will honor all contracts in U.S. dollars. They will repay the bolivar to the dollar. They will invite American oil majors, Chevron, Exxon, back into the country to rebuild the infrastructure. They are forcing the oil back into the dollar system at gunpoint. This exposes the terrifying fragility of the American empire. A true superpower dominates through economics. It offers the best trade deals, the best technology, the most stable currency. People want to use your money, but a declining power cannot compete on merit, so it resorts to coercion. The United States is no longer the leader of the free world in the markets. It has become the enforcer of the dollar standard, and this creates a prison dilemma for every other resource-rich nation. Look at Brazil. Look at the lithium triangle in South America. Look at the cobalt mines in Africa. The message from Washington is clear. Your resources belong to the dollar system. If you try to leave, we will come and get you. But this strategy has a fatal flaw. You can invade one country, you might be able to invade two, but you cannot invade the entire world. The BRICS alliance is too big. The dollarization trend is too advanced. By attacking Venezuela, the U.S. has proved exactly why the world needs an alternative system. They have validated every speech Putin and Siding Pink have ever made about American aggression. Yeah, Siding Pink. You know who I mean. And that's the point. The market doesn't care if you spell the name right. It cares whether the flow of money is changing direction. They have won the battle for Caracas, but they have lost the war for trust. Before today, countries used the dollar because it was convenient. Tomorrow, they will dump the dollar because it is dangerous. Holding U.S. assets now means you are vulnerable. It means your sovereignty is conditional. The petrodollar is no longer a trade agreement. It is a hostage situation. And as history shows, hostage situations rarely end well for the hostage taker. So where does this leave us? The helicopters will eventually leave Caracas. The news cycle will move on. The stock market in New York might even rally for a few days as the prospect of cheap oil intoxicates Wall Street. But the damage to the soul of the international order is permanent. By raiding Venezuela to seize its resources, the United States has officially torn up the mask of the liberal international order. For 70 years, they preached about the sanctity of borders. They sanctioned Russia for violating sovereignty. They lectured China on non-inference. Today, those lectures are worthless. The hypocrisy is now written in bold letters across the sky. The United States has revealed itself not as a global policeman, but as a global pirate. A pirate that is running low on supplies and is willing to board any ship to stay afloat. This act of desperation will not save the dollar. It will accelerate its demise. Think about the reaction in Riyadh. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is watching this. He sees that an oil-rich leader was removed because he threatened the petrodollar status quo. Do you think this makes Saudi Arabia more loyal to Washington? No. It makes them paranoid. It convinces them that they must move their wealth into gold, into yuan, into assets the U.S. military cannot reach. It convinces them to speed up their entry into BRICS. Think about the reaction in Beijing. China now knows that its energy supply lines from the Americas are not safe. This will force China to double down on its pipelines with Russia and Iran. It will force the Eurasian fortress to close its gates even tighter. The U.S. hoped to secure cheap oil. Instead, they have solidified the anti-American alliance. They have drawn a line in the sand, the West versus the rest. And in this new divided world, the West is finding itself outnumbered and out-resourced. You can steal Venezuela's oil for a year, maybe 2, but you cannot steal the future. The economic gravity is shifting to the east. The productive capacity is in the east. And now the moral high ground, as twisted as it sounds, is being claimed by the east. The Venezuela raid will go down in history books, not as a triumph of American power, but as the moment the American empire admitted it was bankrupt. They had to break the glass and pull the emergency lever. The oil may flow north for now, but the trust, the influence, and the legitimacy of the dollar have flowed away forever. The petrodollar is dead. Long live the empire of that's the real game. If you want more of these bank vault explanations, the stuff behind the circus, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what market mystery you want me to pull apart next.